Aliyah Boston's opinion carries weight, not just as a WNBA All-Star, but as someone who's seen Caitlin Clark up close on a professional stage. So when she confidently said Clark would beat Paige Bueckers in a one-on-one, it caught more than a few listeners off guard. Not because Clark isn't talented, but because Boston's endorsement broke the surface of a debate that's divided fans for years.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Sitting beside Candace Parker, Boston framed her stance with calm authority, underlining how elite performance isn't always about hype. It's about what players see and feel when they're on the court with greatness. Boston's comment wasn't about disrespect. It was about realism. These conversations, rooted in first-hand experience and thoughtful analysis, elevate the public's understanding of women's basketball far beyond viral highlights. They add nuance, credibility, and complexity to rivalries like Clark versus Bueckers. That authenticity is what makes the sport compelling, and it's why debates like this matter. They're not just entertainment. They're the fuel driving the game's growth. Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers. This isn't just a fantasy matchup between two of the biggest names in college basketball. It's a cultural flashpoint, a generational divide, a full-blown sports moment that's now being dissected at the highest level, including on a podcast hosted by two WNBA titans, Candace Parker and Aliyah Boston. But the twist? Aliyah Boston didn't hesitate. When the topic turned to who would win one-on-one, she said it straight, Caitlin Clark. And let's be honest, that answer carries weight. Because this wasn't some casual fan conversation on social media. This was a seasoned pro, someone who's gone toe-to-toe with the best of the best, breaking it down with first-hand authority. Boston's opinion isn't based on highlights. It's based on reps, practice, game footage, matchups, professional-level understanding. So when Aliyah Boston puts her vote behind Clark, it's not a diss to Paige Bueckers. It's a data point, a signal, a moment where someone who lives and breathes elite-level basketball pulls back the curtain and tells it like it is. What followed was a nuanced, layered conversation between Boston and Parker that dug way deeper than surface-level hype. It wasn't a hot take battle. It was a real discussion about what makes greatness in today's game. They weren't just comparing jump shots. They were talking about everything: system fit, mental toughness, physicality, long-term potential, basketball IQ. Because that's what separates average conversations from the ones that actually move the sport forward. The debate touched on more than just Clark versus Bueckers. It pulled back the lens and explored the way fans and analysts evaluate talent in women's basketball, and how that evaluation is often overly simplified. Who scores the most? Who has the flashiest passes? Who goes viral? That's the level most debates stay on. But Parker and Boston? They took it all the way to the core. They made it clear basketball at the highest level is never just about the box score. It's about the sum of 1,000 moving parts. Athleticism, confidence, shot selection, defense, consistency, leadership, situational execution, health, endurance, fit within a system. And when you weigh all of that, Aliyah Boston didn't flinch. Caitlin Clark takes it. And why wouldn't she? Boston seen Clark up close, not as a fan, but as a fellow pro. She's played against her, trained alongside her, watched how Clark reads the court, adjusts on the fly, and handles pressure at a level most players never touch. Her opinion isn't built on headlines. It's built on actual experience. That's why it matters. Because let's not forget, Bueckers is phenomenal. The way she moves, the control she plays with, her ability to operate in tight spaces. Those aren't just rare, they're elite. She's been a top-tier talent since her freshman year, and she's done it with poise, even through injury setbacks that would have broken other players. No one is discrediting her resume. But what this debate did, what Aliyah Boston and Candace Parker brought to life, was an honest, informed analysis that acknowledges how even the best players look different depending on context. Clark and Bueckers have taken different paths, different systems, different spotlights, different expectations. Clark's visibility exploded because she's a volume shooter who thrives under pressure, and the numbers followed. Bueckers is surgical, efficient, balanced. But the conversation isn't about who's likable. It's about who wins in a head-to-head matchup right now. based on every measurable and intangible factor. And Boston made it clear she's taking Clark. What makes this conversation so valuable is that it didn't stay stuck in a realm of fantasy matchups. It expanded into a broader critique of how women's basketball talent is understood by the public, and that's where the real meat of the discussion was. Because in men's sports, we've been trained to dissect the game, to ask about schemes, usage rates, spacing, pace, and shot creation. But in women's basketball, the narratives are still catching up. This podcast didn't just push the conversation forward. It demanded better from it. It emphasized that system matters, that a player who thrives in one setup might struggle in another. That comparing stats without comparing usage, tempo, or personnel is like judging a musician on one note. Clark benefits from the green light to shoot. Bueckers has thrived in a more balanced, motion-oriented offense. Different environments, different roles. Neither is better or worse. But they are different. And when Aliyah Boston backed Clark, it wasn't just about scoring ability. It was about how Clark adapts, how she performs under pressure, how she keeps defenses honest, even when she's a number one target every night. That kind of pressure, that kind of gravity, it's not teachable. It's not replicable. And it's exactly why Boston, with all her experience, gave Clark the edge. What also can't be ignored is what this kind of discussion does for the sport overall. It matters that legends like Parker and Boston are having these conversations publicly, because it gives fans permission to care deeply, to argue, to think, to compare eras, to project futures. All the things that have fueled the growth of men's basketball for decades. This isn't drama. This is engagement. This is how you build storylines. This is how you create rivalries that transcend a single game. Clark and Bueckers aren't enemies. They're the faces of a generation. They represent different styles, different energies, and different roads to greatness. And when pro athletes validate those conversations with insight, not pettiness, the whole game wins. It's like the Bird Magic dynamic that carried the NBA into a new era, not because they hated each other, but because they represented two poles of the same phenomenon, talent meeting timing. Clark and Bueckers are doing the same thing for women's basketball. And debates like this one, they're the fuel. So no, Aliyah Boston didn't disrespect Caitlin Clark. She endorsed her. She gave her the kind of praise that only comes from someone who's seen the game at its fastest, toughest, and most unforgiving. That's not shade. That's credibility. And if anything, this podcast proved that these conversations are way overdue. They're not just about crowning one player over another. They're about taking women's basketball seriously enough to debate it, to analyze it, to break it down piece by piece, not just ride the surface-level narratives. This is the direction the sport needs. Less fluff, more substance, more respect for nuance. Because the truth is, debates like Clark versus Bueckers aren't just sports talk. They're moments of cultural progression. They build bridges between hardcore fans and new ones. They make room for passionate discourse. They invite people into the fold. And when those conversations are led by players who know the game inside and out, they hit different. Aliyah Boston putting Clark ahead in that matchup wasn't about playing favorites. It was about recognizing game. And more importantly, it was about pulling the conversation into the future. Let us know who you think takes the win in a one-on-one. Are you Team Clark or Team Bueckers? Drop your thoughts below. Hit like if you want more debates like this from players who actually get it, and subscribe to keep the conversations going. Because women's basketball is finally having its moment, and you're not going to want to miss what's next. And if you're still wondering why this conversation blew up, why it's everywhere, why people are hanging on to every word Candace Parker and Aliyah Boston said, it's because we've hit a turning point. This debate between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers isn't just a basketball take. It's a cultural moment in women's sports that fans have been starving for. Real rivalries, real analysis, real passion. It's the type of honest, layered dialogue that's been sorely missing from the conversation around women's basketball. For years, people have treated the women's game with kid gloves, talking around it, oversimplifying it, giving surface-level praise, and moving on. But this Clark versus Bueckers conversation, this is how you grow the game. Not just by showing highlights or talking up feel-good stories, but by debating greatness, by dissecting style, by letting legends weigh in with honesty. And that's exactly what happened here. Aliyah Boston didn't throw shade. She didn't downplay Bueckers. She just told the truth as she sees it, based on her lived experience at the pro level. And that truth? Caitlin Clark's game hits different. When Boston said she'd pick Clark, she wasn't being provocative. She wasn't trying to go viral. She was making a basketball decision. A calculated call, grounded in what she's seen, played against, and understood as a forward who guards the paint against elite guards like Clark. Because Clark's not just a volume shooter. She's not just flashy. What sets her apart, and what Boston was really highlighting, is how she operates in the chaos. She plays with gravity. She shifts defenses. She stretches the court. She creates opportunities, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. That kind of player makes a system better. That's the distinction Boston was getting at. Not just talent, but impact. And when you ask a player like Aliyah Boston, who she bet on in a head-to-head matchup, based on all of that, her answer has real weight. It's not a slight to Paige Bueckers. Bueckers is elite in her own right. She's a fluid scorer, a savvy passer, and one of the most fundamentally sound guards come out of the NCAA in the last decade. But the thing is, this conversation isn't about who's better on paper. It's about who dominates in today's game, under today's rules, with today's intensity. And based on how Clark's been handling that pressure, absorbing double teams, navigating contact, launching logo threes, and still leading the league in exposure and performance, Boston's pick starts to make a lot of sense. What's also crucial is how Parker and Boston had this conversation. They didn't make it petty. They didn't take it personal. It was thoughtful, measured, focused on the basketball. And that's where women's sports is finally catching up. We're not just watching the games anymore. We're breaking them down. We're talking shop. We're creating the discourse that men's sports has had the benefit of for decades. Because this isn't just about the Clark-Bueckers matchup. It's about what it represents. Two women, different styles, different fan bases, different journeys, and both carrying the weight of massive expectations. They aren't just players, they're symbols. One is viewed as the explosive scorer who changes the pace of the game. The other is seen as a cerebral technician, executing with finesse. They don't just play differently, they're marketed differently. And that's why this conversation feels so alive. Because whether you agree with Boston's take or not, the fact that she could say it publicly with confidence and spark real debate, that is progress. This is exactly how the NBA grew its identity in the 1980s. Not just through games, but through the tension, the comparisons, the contrast of Magic Johnson's flair versus Larry Bird's grit. Those conversations built the modern NBA. They made it emotional. They made it matter. And that's what we're seeing here. Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers are ushering in an era of women's basketball where fans aren't just watching. They're choosing sides. They're invested. They're talking. They're caring. And this entire debate, backed by the voices of professionals like Boston and Parker, gives fans permission to go deeper, to ask more from the coverage, to expect more from the commentary, to move past shallow praise, and actually debate greatness. And honestly, this is what it looks like when a sport grows up. It's messy, it's opinionated, it's full of disagreement, but it's necessary because greatness demands comparison. Legacy demands context. And now, finally, the women's game is getting that same treatment. What's also worth noting is how respectful the entire conversation remained. This wasn't one of those debates where people tear others down to lift one person up. It was clear from the start, both Bueckers and Clark are elite. The discussion was about preference, projection, and performance under pressure, not personal attacks. That's the bar we need to keep holding. Because if this rivalry is going to live up to its potential, it has to be fueled by respect, not division. We don't need to tear Paige Bueckers down to celebrate Caitlin Clark, and vice versa. They're both generational talents. They're both elevating the sport. But when it comes to one-on-one, based on what we've seen, and who's thriving at the highest level right now, Aliyah Boston said it. Caitlin Clark gets the nod. Then again, that assessment didn't come from Twitter. It came from someone who sees the game with professional eyes. Someone who knows how hard it is to be great. Someone who's felt Clark's impact up close and still said, yeah, she's the one right now. That matters. And it speaks to a bigger truth. There's a new kind of honesty forming in women's basketball. A willingness to say what needs to be said, even if it stirs things up. That's how you build something real. That's how you create legacy-level discourse. This wasn't disrespect. It was recognition. It was Aliyah Boston using her platform to spotlight why Caitlin Clark's presence is changing the game, not just for fans, but for the players too. Clark isn't just stacking stats. She's forcing the entire sport to evolve. And that's why her name keeps showing up in conversations that matter. And here's the bottom line. If debates like this keep happening, and if pros keep weighing with real insight, we're going to see an entire culture shift, a new layer of engagement, a deeper level of fandom. We're not just witnessing the rise of two superstars. We're witnessing the birth of a rivalry that could define a generation. And it started not on the court, but on a podcast between two veterans, saying what everyone's been thinking, but maybe didn't have the platform or the credibility or the confidence to say out loud. Now it's out there, and we're all better for it. And let's be honest, if this is what the future of women's basketball looks like, we're in for something special. Because this isn't just about two elite players. It's about a culture that's finally shifting from safe, rehearsed narratives into real, unfiltered conversations. What Candace Parker and Aliyah Boston did wasn't just drop an opinion. They gave the sport permission to breathe, to exist in a messy, passionate space where opinions clash, fans choose sides, and rivalries matter. For years, the women's game has been boxed into a very specific kind of storytelling. Everyone's friends. Everyone supports everyone. No drama. No debate. No uncomfortable truths. But growth doesn't live there. Growth needs friction. It needs difference. And it needs a kind of honest, experience-backed analysis that players like Boston can offer without sugarcoating it. That's what this whole conversation proved. Aliyah Boston had every reason to play it safe. She could have defaulted to neutrality, said something vague, deflected the question, but she didn't. She took a stance. She said Clark would take that one-on-one. And because it came from her, from someone who's already earned her stripes at the highest level, it landed with authority. It mattered. And what's even more telling is the reaction. People didn't dismiss her take. They engaged with it. Fans dissected it. Players reacted. The comment sections exploded, not with outrage, but with curiosity. Because deep down, this is the kind of conversation we've all wanted for years. The kind where we can talk talent, skill, potential, and style without tiptoeing around it like it's sacred ground. Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers deserve to be talked about like this. Not because they're women, not because it's trendy, but because they're legitimately great. They're the kind of generational talents who inspire obsession, loyalty, and heated debates. They're not just good for the women's game. They are the women's game right now. And putting their games under a microscope isn't disrespectful. It's respect at the highest level. Because we don't have these kinds of debates about irrelevant players. We do it for icons. We do it for game changers. And that's what both of them are. Still, Boston's pick makes waves because it draws a line in the sand. It forces us to ask why. Why Clark over Bueckers? Why now? What does she see that others don't? And that's where it gets even deeper. Because Boston's not just seeing Clark's numbers. She's feeling her presence. Caitlin Clark doesn't just score. She alters the entire game. Her range stretches defenses before she even crosses half court. Her passing forces rotations. Her confidence puts pressure on opponents before the tip-off even happens. That's impact. And that's what Boston was trying to underline. Not just who's more polished, but who forces a defense to change the way it plays. There are levels to this. And Clark is operating on one that very few players, male or female, ever reach. That said, choosing Clark doesn't mean dismissing Paige. In fact, the fact that this is even a debate speaks to how far the women's game has come. Because it's not about tearing someone down to build the other up. It's about acknowledging that both are elite while still asking the tough question. Who edges the other out? That question is what sports fans live for. This is why people show up, why they buy tickets, why they watch pre-game breakdowns and post-game recaps. They don't just want highlights. They want stakes. They want storylines. They want to care. And this debate gives them that. The best part? It's just beginning. These two players are at the very start of what could be decade-long careers. This isn't the end of the Clark versus Bueckers conversation. It's the origin story. We haven't even gotten to the chapter where they face off consistently at the pro level. We haven't seen how their styles adapt, how injuries heal, how teammates, systems, and coaching evolve. All we know right now is this. The people closest to the game are paying attention. And when someone like Aliyah Boston says Clark is that player, it reshapes the public perception. It tells fans to take notice. It signals that the power dynamics in the league are shifting. It shows us that we're not just witnessing individual greatness. We're watching the rise of a new era. And that's what makes this conversation feel so urgent, so compelling, so real. Because this isn't just fun speculation anymore. It's reputation defining. It's the stuff careers are remembered by. Think about how many times we look back at NBA rivalries and said, that was a moment it changed. Magic versus Bird, Kobe versus AI, LeBron versus Durant. The first time those comparisons were made, they were just conversations, opinions, takes. But those takes aged into history. And now, we're watching that happen with Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers in real time. Only this time, it's the women's game writing the legacy. So, yeah, this conversation matters. Not just because it's about two great players, but because of what it unlocks. It unlocks possibility, tension, excitement. It gives fans a reason to tune, and that goes beyond the scoreboard. It gives us a story. And Aliyah Boston, knowingly or not, added a brand new chapter. One where she said, I've seen the top of this mountain, and Clark's already there. Now it's up to the rest of the league, and Paige Bueckers included, to respond. Drop your take in the comments. Do you agree with Boston's pick? Or are you riding with Bueckers all the way? Hit the like button if you're here for this new era of real talk in women's basketball, and subscribe so you never miss a moment, because this rivalry is only going to get louder, bigger, and better from here.